Hi everyone, welcome back to Beautiful British English. My name is Paul and today we're going to talk about relative clauses. How you use relative pronouns correctly. Right, now a lot of you will have heard me speaking about the use of relative pronouns, especially as a fluency hack for using your IELTS or TOEFL or any kind of speaking and writing exam. But when you're speaking, they're very easy to use, but when you're writing and using relative pronouns, there's some grammar that you need to be aware of. So this fluency lesson is about how to use them in your writing. Yeah, so let's just briefly take a quick look at our relative pronouns. We have who, whose, which and that. These are our relative pronouns, okay, and we use these pronouns in what are called relative clauses. A clause is a part of a sentence that has a subject and a verb, okay. Now, there are two types of relative clauses. There are determining and non-determining relative clauses. Determining, I like to call determining an identifying clause. And a non-determining is non-identifying. Yeah? But what does that actually mean and how do you use them? What is the difference? So, you'll see on the screen I have two sentences for you. My sister who lives in Canada visited me last week. My sister who lives in Canada visited me last week. Essentially, the sentences are exactly the same. I'm hoping you can see that there is a slight difference. The second sentence contains two commas. Let's examine our first sentence first. My sister who lives in Canada visited me last week. Now, in this scenario, yeah, for the purposes of this scenario, I want you to understand that I have two sisters. So I have two sisters. So I have my sister Jane, who lives in Canada, and I have my sister Sarah, who lives in Australia. So in the first sentence, my sister who lives in Canada visited me last week. My sister who lives in Canada. So my sister who lives in Canada in this case, we're talking about my sister Jane because she is my sister who lives in Canada. This sentence here, or this clause here, is what we call an identifying. This is identifying. It's an identifying clause. And it's known as an identifying clause because it is identifying one of more than one of many. In this case, I have two sisters. And this clause here, my sister who lives in Canada, is identifying my sister who lives in Canada, in this case, Jane. So my sister who lives in Canada visited me last week. My sister who lives in Australia didn't visit me last week. Yeah? So these two sisters, there could be three, there could be five, there could be as many sisters as we can count. Obviously, for this example, I'm using sisters, but we could be talking about anything. The main thing I want you to understand here is, my sister who lives in Canada visited me last week, without any commas, is what we call an identifying clause. And it's identifying because there is more than one thing that we have to select from. Yeah? So, that's number one. Okay, now, for scenario number two here, I only have one sister. So, my sister, who lives in Canada, visited me last week. In this scenario here, who lives in Canada is separated from the rest of the sentence with commas because this is extra information It is extra information. It is not identifying anything because there's I only have one sister. So it's not identifying, it is just providing extra information. It's not information that is necessary for understanding the sentence. In the first scenario, my sister who lives in Canada, that is information that is necessary because there are two sisters. One in Canada, one in Australia. In scenario number 2, there's only one sister, so we do not need extra identifying information. So this is just providing extra information, unnecessary information. And because it's unnecessary, it has to be separated with commas. Okay? I hope that's clear. I hope that helps to clarify for you guys how to use your relative clauses. Right, now just before we finish this lesson, I just want to clarify exactly what we use these relative pronouns to identify. So, who is the relative pronoun that we use to identify the person who is doing or performing the action. Whom is a relative pronoun we use to identify whoever is receiving the action. Whereas whose is only ever used to identify ownership or the possession, not of an action but of an object. Yeah? So that leaves us with both which and that, which are used with things, anything except people. Okay? Now something else that you guys need to be aware of. You now know the difference between an identifying and a non-identifying relative clause. So when you are using your identifying relative clauses, you can use which or that in your clause. Doesn't matter. But in a non-identifying clause, only use which. You cannot use that in a non-identifying clause. You only use which. So this is a little grammar rule that you should be aware of. Okay? That's it. That's the end of this video lesson. I hope this has helped to clarify for you guys how you use relative pronouns and how you create the identifying and non-identifying relative clauses.